Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, I should say, because we have participants from across the globe joining Global PMIP Partners webcast on M&A communication. My name is Tom Kessler, and I will guide you through the topic today. And I will start with briefly the agenda. Give you some information about who I am, and then we dive right into the topic with a brief introduction to M&A communication, why conducting a stakeholder analysis is paramount for a good communication plan, building your communication plan, and what to focus on in the communication for signing day one and during the first 100 days. We will finish the session with a Q&A session, and I hope that I should be able to guide you through in about 30 minutes so that we have plenty of time for questions that you may have and you may want to discuss. Very briefly, my name is Tom Kessler. I'm the German partner of Global PMIP Partners. We are a next-generation consulting firm that focuses exclusively on pre- and post-merger integration. I've worked across several industry sectors in fast-moving consumer goods, in the utilities, in banking, in automotive, in specialty chemicals, and various forms of the technology sector, as well as telecom services and equipment. I've helped small, mid, and large cap transactions to be integrated and worked in the United States, where we lived about 6 years, Southeast Asia, all across Europe, where I live today, and also in North Africa. My focus from a topic point of view is the Integration Management Office, transition service agreements, communication, but also identifying, quantifying, and implementing synergies. I've trained several hundreds of executives on M&A integration, and last year alone I was 14 weeks across the globe, starting from Hong Kong, Sydney, Singapore, through Dubai, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, London, and into Toronto, New York City, and San Francisco, where I held trainings. So quite an interesting time also to talk to executives about post-merger integration and discuss with them how they do it and compare notes with how we do it. Without further ado, let's jump right into the topic. And I would like to start the topic with with an interesting story of mine. Several years back, I was involved in a deal. Albany International purchased Geshme. Albany International is a company that's in the paper machine clothing business. They make these felts that go on paper machines. And they had bought Geshme, and following the announcement, within 2 months, they had lost about a third of their market cap. You can think twice what was going on in that company. And that was also the time when they were closer to the closing of the deal and when they brought us on board. It's actually a Darden business case. If you ever have access to the Darden library, look it up, Albany International buying Geshme. If you think that a third of the share price reduction does not have an impact on the mood in the company, well, then you don't live in reality. So you can bet what had happened in that company. A lot of the Albany International folks were really not excited about that acquisition at all. So the mood really kind of the company went pretty much down, and you can see the chart on the left-hand side, which is the Kubler-Ross change curve, essentially. That happened in the Albany International case. Now, you would rather want to design a communication plan like that demonstrates a performance like the one chart on the right-hand side. And that would be much more something that would be more desirable. But reality is, and we know that we typically see more something like the development on the left-hand side. Now, a good communication plan can help you to ensure that the performance is not as radical as it is depicted on the left-hand side. So that's why we're here today. That's why we want to talk today. Poor communication planning, let me just click that away. Poor communication planning is one of the key pitfalls that you will see in merger success. And to avoid that, you need to establish frequent communication to all stakeholder audiences. And if you do that, this is really a hallmark of sound integration planning and successfully implementing mergers and acquisition success. Now, how do you identify that poor communication is planning? What are the symptoms and signs that you can depict something is not right? If executives communicate reactive and not proactive, if there is a lack of established communication vehicles for the buyer, for the acquiring organization, if there is a limited risk assessment pre-work to determine the high priority communication needs, if these things are happening, you know that communication planning is not well done. Most of all, if you see that information sharing is just happening on an as needed basis, so just as it is needed to inform people, it's also a clear sign that things are not very well. The potential outcomes would be that employee morale is really negatively impacted. The customers are confused and they become the prime target of your competitors. Very interestingly, a couple of years back, Bosch had announced that they were going to sell their pneumatics business. They didn't have a buyer back then. They just announced that they would sell it. You can think twice what happened with their competitors. Their competitors put out plans to go after Bosch pneumatics customers right away. And only 2 years after the initial announcement, they were able to sell the business to a financial investor. So the outcomes can be quite severely if you don't handle communication well. Other causes that could happen, or other outcomes that could happen, is key employees defect, and the energy, the integration energy, is spent more on reactive issues and putting out fires than on really building and creating the vision that you put in place to begin with when you actually looked at the target and when you said, well, this is a company that we want to buy because there is value in our combination of the two assets. So steps to address: solidify the key messages for each key stakeholder audience in advance of day 0, meaning signing. Create a communication plan matrix for the time between signing and closing, and establish the communication channels and vehicles that you know work when you and how you can reach your various stakeholders, whether these are the employees on the plant floor, whether these are the customers, stakeholders in terms of suppliers, press, the unions, or works council, regardless of, established channels and vehicles to reach them with your communication. Draft communication for senior executives to speed the execution. And most of all, develop a rolling frequently asked question log that helps you to address the key things various stakeholders want. So internally for the employees, but also externally for customers and suppliers. Most importantly for you is to understand that the purpose of the communication will change as the deal rolls on. So between signing and closing, it's all about explaining and justifying the benefits of the deal. Why did you do the deal? It's all about announcing management changes and outlining the integration. During the first months post-closing, it's important to look into value preservation. So understanding the key challenges and perceptions is key for the employees from a communications point of view that you craft. Breaking the bad news is also important in that period, and encouraging the employees to really stay focused on the business. In that period between the first and the third month, or first to 6 months and to 3 to 12 months, what's important is here the value generation. So your communication needs to be geared towards highlighting the progress, showing the quick wins that you actually achieved, encourage participation in the integration, and then demonstrating the business improvement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. In that period, 3 to 12 months to 6 to 24 months, it's all about the value realization and establishment. So this time, it's all about acknowledging the contributions and setting a clear vision for where things will develop towards. I talked earlier about the importance of the stakeholder analysis. And the key components for an accelerated strategic communication, they start with a stakeholder analysis. So you want to understand the context and the culture. You want to understand the issues and the questions your various stakeholders have. You want to understand the resistance and the barriers, because you need that information to craft and refine your messaging. If you do understand that from a solid stakeholder analysis, you can drive a proactive messaging. And that proactive messaging should be supported by a targeted strategy. It should be audience-focused, should be very clear in the objectives, and it should be also very geared towards the various channels, or the channels how you can reach the various target stakeholder groups, and also the timing logically. So make sure that you have the channels, timings, and messaging aligned. Define the roles and responsibilities for the communication. It's not all going to be the CEO. It's also going to be across the board who needs to communicate with which stakeholder group, and what's the responsibility, what's their role. So ultimately, this helps you to define the process and ensure that the accountabilities are set. And one more thing that's really, really important. It needs to be an ongoing communication. So there needs to be an upward feedback loop. There needs to be the ability to use influencers, to use role models, to communicate the key messages on an ongoing basis going on. Multi-channel, periodic marketing, these are also things that will help you in your communication. And then evaluate the feedback, evaluate the measures that you have. Let me ask you a quick question. How often do you think that you have opened a fridge in your lifetime? Well, I think if you think a little bit about it and throw some numbers around, you probably come to the answer about 10,000 times. When you open your fridge, what can you be assured of? The light goes on. And the same holds true for your airbag. When you get into your car and you know that, and you actually, which hopefully will not happen, but you actually have an accident, you know that the airbag will go off. So saying, writing, guaranteeing that the airbag will go off, if it needs to, is a fact that we all trust in when we buy a car. On the other hand, saying, writing, and guaranteeing what we communicate post-merger does absolutely not guarantee that it will be accurately recalled. And that is a very important thing you need to remember. You cannot expect stakeholders to fully absorb 100% or even 50% of the messages that are communicated. You have to test it to prove it, and that's why you need the stakeholder analysis on an ongoing basis. Don't do it just once, do it several times, so that you know that it actually works. M&A ultimately is something that you need to understand as an emotionally laden change event, because that's what it really is. And when we talk about emotionally laden change events, let me guide you through one of the experiences I had. Because there are a lot of objections by executives against stakeholder analysis. And this is the story that I call the Mickey Mouse tie. I was meeting with a general manager. He had greeted us hello in the evening, the day before we were supposed to have several meetings. And it was all nice at that point in time. The next morning, we come into his office, and he sits across at the table, looks at me and says, "Do you know, Thomas, what I think about what you're going to do here?" And he showed me his Mickey Mouse tie. And when you're in such a situation, okay. Good. Let's, Sheila, are we back on?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. Yeah, because something happened. I don't know what happened in the back there. Anyway, doesn't matter. So to finish up the story, essentially, he looked into my face, showed me his Mickey Mouse tie, and said, "This is what I think you're doing." When you're in such a situation, essentially, you know what's going on in his mind. It wasn't that he didn't like us. It wasn't that he didn't like me personally. It was he was completely afraid that we were there to shut down his subsidiary, his plant. That was his most important thing. And that is one of the reasons, and you can see a number of them here on this list, what executives actually are experiencing when they don't want you to conduct a stakeholder analysis. Yet we all know that the stakeholder analysis is the fundament that you build your communication strategy on, because it gives you the ability to understand the concerns and what's on the mind of the various stakeholders. So that's why it's really important to conduct that. From that stakeholder analysis, you will be able to pick out the issues. You will be able to know exactly what audience has what issues, and you will be able to connect the channels to communicate to them in that cube that you see here on the right-hand side. So building your communication plan has a lot to do in understanding the issues, the audience, and the channels. In any M&A situation, there are many more questions than answers. And business as usual doesn't exist typically during an M&A transaction. The further removed you're from the decision-making power, the lower is your tolerance for ambiguity. Think about the guy or the lady on the shop floor, on the packaging unit in the plant. They have no tolerance about what the big guys are saying if they feel that they're not treated directly, openly. So in the absence of frequent and credible communication, the rumor mongers take control. It's very clear. If the top management doesn't communicate on a regular basis and clearly target towards the various stakeholders, they make up the stories. So what we need to do when we run M&A communication projects, we need to anticipate root questions and answers. We need to develop the core messages. We need to be visible on and across the firm. And we need to ensure genuine two-way dialogue. A couple of months back, I was in a town hall meeting. And the company had just announced that they were going to invest about 4 million euros into the plant. And one lady out of the 150 that were in that town hall meeting stood up and talked and asked the question to the CEO. "Well, dear sir, I heard that you're going to invest a lot of money into the plant. And I also heard that this is to further automate the plant. Now, you know our history. We've lost a substantial amount, half of our workforce, half of our colleagues, through automation. Now, does this mean that we will also lose more colleagues, and I may actually lose my job? And because the CEO was well prepped through a root Q&A and key message document from us, he responded extremely well, and probably also because he's just a good guy and knows how to communicate well. But he really took her serious. He said, yes, we are going to increase the automation of this plant, and yes, we are going to increase the capacity. But because we are investing into the capacity, we need each and every one of you here in the plant. So he knew how to address that topic that was brought towards him. And that's essentially what we need to do with the communication planning. We need to understand the issues and we need to find answers. So when we are asked, that we can respond. This is a short template about how to put a communication plan together. So think about the phase that you're in, the timing, the audience, the media that you will use, the objectives and the message that you want to bring across. Who is going to actually be the person that brings it across? Is it going to be the department head? Is it going to be the team leader? Is it going to be one of the board members? Is it going to be one of the executives? Regardless who, that needs to be planned out, and who's responsible ultimately for crafting that message. And this gets us now into thinking through what we need to do on this day of signing, or what we need to do for the day of signing, I should rather say. What we need to do for day one, and also what we need to do for the first 100 days and the time beyond that. So the signing communication needs to include the deal announcement and press release. And you can think back, and that's where we come full circle, to the Albany International Geshme transaction, where I told you they had lost in the first 2 months a third of their market cap. They didn't do a very good job in the deal announcement. Yes, the paper industry was in consolidation, and so were the paper machine closing manufacturers, essentially the suppliers to the paper industry. But yet, they would have had to communicate much better on expected synergies and what they were going to do to retain their key customers. That would have been much more comfort to Wall Street or the capital markets to know how to deal with this case. Next is the executive alignment. The executive alignment is essentially a workshop that happens right after the signing with key employees, key executives, and managers in the organization. It's typically face-to-face, and if it's geographically dispersed, through video call. And it all needs to discuss, why are we doing the deal? What are the benefits for us? And how are we going to manage the integration governance and the integration itself? So the integration governance is also something that you really need to communicate to the employees. If you are using consultants, make sure that you have a consulting assistance communication. Why is that? You don't want to have people looking at you and then starting the rumor mill. Look at these guys. What are they doing here? We haven't heard that they are coming. And it starts kind of a pyramid or an avalanche of questions, and that only leads towards rumors. So the next thing then is to announce the integration team post-signing. And what's also important is to have a frequent communication with the employees. Weekly updates would be best. Now, how do you deal with this if you are buying a plant? Most plant managers don't have corporate email accounts. Well, what we did in one of the recent transactions that I was involved in, we put flip charts into the changing room for the plant guys and some pens, and they could write anonymously on that flip chart what was their concerns, what were their concerns and questions. And then within a couple of days following the collection of the flip charts, we sent out flyers into the changing room and gave answers. And that was throughout the first 3 months of post-closing. Another thing that you need to discuss is the permitted pre-close HR updates. So in other words, what can you do before the closing in terms of informing the employees? And that's a limited, it's a limited amount that you can communicate. Most definitely you want to wait up for antitrust clearance. And once antitrust clearance has happened, you can communicate a bit more openly, but you need to still be to be guarded. So you can talk about benefits, compensation, HR development, and staffing to a limited degree during that period of time. And you want to be careful and sensitive how you communicate, because you're still not the owner. You are just the owner as of day one. For day one, you want to prepare the closing announcement, the closing letter to the shareholders, the closing letter to customers and distributors, as well as to partners, suppliers, and service providers. And then last but not least, a welcome letter on day one of the closing, which should be much more comprehensive than announcing the deal and letting the people know that the company was acquired post-signing. Day one. For day one, you should have a solid communication developed for the employees, as well as the customers and other stakeholders. And I just put in the content of these two communication plans and communication memorandums that we put together in a transaction. And these would be typically things that you would want to actually develop. So the key messages to employees, employee talking points, frequently asked questions, anything that they really are interested in knowing and understanding from day one, which would include benefits, incentives, and so forth. Same thing holds true for the customers, suppliers, and other key stakeholders. During the first 100 days and beyond, what you really want to ensure is that you keep the momentum and the motivation and the good spirit. The only way I know of, and I've said about 30, is if you create a credible communication with the various stakeholders. If you're accessible to employees. In the fast-moving consumer goods transactions that I talked about earlier, the CFO came flown over the first couple of months, every 3 weeks, to visit the people on the shop floor. And the supply chain departments and the logistics. And he had direct conversations. First, they were for him to actually and get to the layoff. We once a meeting with the entire team, entire steering committee, where we talked about what's called our 8-to-8 marathon meeting, where we talked about everything and anything and the decisions needed to be done for the integration. So he took always that as a time to actually talk with the people. Position the integration as an experience that is fun and exciting. And why is that important? Because there is some overtime going to happen. And we all know that that can be sometimes overwhelming. So if there is some fun, if you can keep the excitement in what people are doing for the integration, that's really paramount for the momentum. Celebrate quick wins and acknowledge individuals. Really communicate the successes of highly visible through highly visible role models. And when we did the T-Mobile Orange integration in the Netherlands, what we did there was on a monthly basis, once a month, from 5 o'clock in the evening to 7 o'clock in the evening, we had a town hall meeting, a town hall party that was called. The executives had the possibility to acknowledge and celebrate some of the quick wins, acknowledge some of the key individuals that had achieved some significant breakthroughs. And then there was time to drink, eat, and dance a little bit. So that was, for example, one way to really keep the momentum going. Furthermore, if you are into some topics and you're being asked what you want to communicate, or if you can communicate about those hot topics, but you're not there yet, it's important for you to say that you don't know at this point in time the result or the outcome of your investigation or what you're doing in your preparations. So state that you're working on it, because if you don't, again, the rumor mill will start again. Smile. It's a very good thing to do that a lot. And keep your composure at all times. You will be challenged by people that directly into your face can be really aggressive. You will be challenged by works council, even by unions. So you need to keep your composure at all times, because that is also important to keep the momentum and keep the motivation, keep the good spirit. Last but not least, I want to highlight that it's important for you to have these 4 elements of communication prepared. You have to have the vision deck. You should have a clearly defined stakeholder mapping with all the messages, with all the issues that you pick out of the stakeholder analysis. Ensure that you have a solid day 1 plan and an ongoing communications plan. Now, this is essentially the end of my quick talk on M&A communication. Just wanted to let you know I will hold an online mastermind which starts on July 28th about post-merger integration for executives. So it starts from how do we do deals with regard to where should we look for targets, how should we need to think about M&A strategy, all the way through due diligence, signing, what you need to do pre-closing, into the first 100 days. All of that will be discussed in that online mastermind starting July 28th. If you're interested, give me a call, send me an email, and I'll offer a free consultation beforehand for you to find out if that's something for you or not. Let's open the floor, Sheila, for questions and answers, and I'm available for you to answer any question that you may have.
Okay, great. If anyone has a question, you can send it through the chat box. I want to thank you all for taking the time to attend today. And we'll post a recording of this on our website as well if there's any slides that you missed.
Can you check? Can you help me check on the chat?
Yeah, it doesn't look like we've got anything yet. I think we've got some shy people. Okay.
No, here we have one. Okay. David from Barcelona.
Hi, David. Do you have a question? The video will be posted. So after this call, we'll post the video on our website at gpmip.com, and it'll be under the newsroom tab.
And yes, you can swipe as much as you want from all the slides that I showed here.
And as far as access to the slides, Thomas, is there, would you be open to sharing a PDF of this presentation?
Yes, I can share a PDF of this presentation simply for people can watch the video and can take the content and take it this way. So they can also have a PDF. Absolutely.
Okay,
no
great.
problem.
So we'll also post the PDF on our website as well. Okay, Thomas, we have a question. When are unions to be involved?
Okay, thanks for the question, Patrick. Unions are essentially involved when there's anything with regard to the changes in compensation or the benefits that are associated with it. So for the fast-moving consumer goods transaction that I was working on, the unions were clearly involved because the company that had bought essentially those two brands from a large fast-moving consumer goods group, they also built essentially an EMEA headquarter. They hired people, and they wanted to ensure, the unions wanted to ensure that the new people that came on board were slotted in the same compensation brackets. That was one concern that the unions had, and the other concern that the unions had was that they wanted to avoid that the company, that the acquiring company, were going to lower or think about lowering or not keeping the compensation the way it was done by the previous owner. So there are a couple of more questions. Okay. When to communicate? Well, it's the moment you know the deal is going on or is happening, unions pick up on that immediately. Because the moment it is announced, Works Council typically knows about it, and with Works Council knowing it, unions also know it. That would be the typical situation in Europe, but also in North America, for example. When to communicate with the unions? Typically post-closing, communicate with the unions if it's closed, because you're not, and therefore, in my mind, it's not a good timing to communicate with them. Okay, how do you minimize the noise when you have a delay, sign and close, and there's not much you can communicate due to legal constraints? Very good question, Emma. What you always can do is that you discuss and communicate why you did the deal. So when you announce the deal, you typically have some wording around why are you doing the deal, the logic behind it, and what you want to achieve. And you clearly, because it's a public communication, you will communicate a number of things that you can state in public. And to reiterate that and to communicate that to the people on the shop floor, or in the company, regardless where it is, that's important, and to restate that. Because again, remember what I told, what I discussed with regard to the refrigerator effect or the airbag effect. People just don't remember, what you said and what was written in the announcement. They may not even have access to the announcement. So I think it's important to pick up on that.
And I just wanted to note, I think some people might be asking questions through the Q&A box, and I can't seem to be able to access that. So I would suggest that if you have a question, please make sure you do it through the chat box.
Yeah.
I don't know, Thomas, are you able to view what's in the Q&A box? I can't view it.
I see it. What's on the Q&A box?
Oh, so those questions?
Yeah. Patrick, for example, said bpost got a strike because unions Belgium were not aware of the possible takeover of Post NL. So he's saying because the unions were not involved the very first day, the Belgian Post saw a strike coming up, and that's correct. When we were at a client the other day in Austria, they also said the moment they have a transaction going on, because there is employee representatives on the board of directors, typically the unions know of that and they cannot stop that, even so it's actually not allowed to communicate that. And the case that I was talking about was a private family-owned business. I would not in that situation at all discuss with the unions before closing. But you're right, when it comes to public transactions, like in the case of bpost and Post Netherlands, that actually needs to be something that you need to consider. Yeah, absolutely spot on. Thank you. David is asking, can we send questions to you, Thomas, regarding today's material? Yes, you can. You can send them to my email account or my email post this webcast. If you want to have them dealt with in this Q&A, you need to type them into the chat box, please. Stephen Solera writes, in the example of the 4 million improvement in the plant, I do not believe the CEO answered the question. He only addressed the near term, not the long term. No, I think I would disagree with you, Steve. I think he addressed it very clearly in saying they are expanding the capacity, and truth was that the former owner or the seller of the plant had typically 3 to 4% revenue growth per year. The new owner was able to generate above 10%. And that was due to a different model, how they actually approached the market. They came up with a different sales model. The large fast-moving consumer goods group had essentially the tendency or the strategy to sell everything that they had in one big bag, and one component or one article were the two brands among others. So they sold shampoo with salami, with soup, with anything else. And if you have such a strategy, you're not talking to a specific buyer. That's the buyer of this plant actually now was able to do. And so they had a totally different communication that changed completely the ability of who was actually managing the P&L in the retail store. That caused more promotions, was aided by more advertising, created more sales. That additional sales needed to, or triggered essentially the importance to build up the capacity, and that was the reason why I believe the CEO very much answered the question, because he clearly addressed, we will build up the capacity and you will have a job here. Okay. Any other questions? Good. Then okay, here's another question. You haven't mentioned legacy cultural measurement as a prerequisite to an M&A deal. In your experience, is this discretionary or compulsory, as communication will surely change according to the legacy culture to be integrated? Really great question, Richard. Absolutely. And you know what? When I talk to my customers, I always say, don't start with the culture assessment when you are in due diligence or even into signing a deal. Start when you actually pick your targets. And I have a one-pager that I ask people to just go through for their own company and also look at what they know about the target that they are looking at. And by understanding whether they have a flat hierarchy versus a very top-down hierarchical structure, by understanding whether information is widely shared or held closely together, by understanding how they actually deal with behaviors and with the way decisions are made in the company. By really going through that one-pager and understanding the various aspects of culture, they get a good understanding what they're getting into. And then the next thing that they need to do is, once they have actually picked a target, and once they move into management presentations, once they move into due diligence or negotiations, adjust that one-pager on an ongoing basis. Refine the understanding of the culture that you're getting into and the culture that you have. And if you have a very solid understanding of that, then I think communication is much going to be improved. Absolutely. Yeah. Great question, Richard. Thanks. Any other questions? Okay. Calling 3, calling 1, calling 2. Great.
Okay, well, thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Thomas.
Okay, bye now. And by the way, we have another webcast that's important to actually, I almost forgot. We have another webcast that comes up. This is in about 2 weeks. Scott Whitaker is
actually
going
a week from tomorrow. A week from tomorrow, next Thursday, the 30th. Next
Thursday. Thank you very much, Sheila, for that correction. So next Thursday, the 30th, Scott Whitaker is going to talk about training. And to give you an understanding what he's talking about, I don't know whether you can see that book that we wrote. It's essentially Scott is the author with 10 of us partners writing it, and he's going to talk about training, PMI training. Thank you very much.